What are reasonable expectations towards your spouse? What should you do if your friend's child hits your own? And to what extent should in-laws help out around your house? Our first thread of the day is titled, Am I wanting too much from my spouse? Genuinely curious. She says, so my husband has work off today. He's supposed to go to a baseball game with the guys. And I was supposed to have a sitter come over to help with our toddler because I'm sick and pregnant. The two aren't related, but when I'm sick and 34 weeks pregnant, I really am useless. We had to cancel the sitter because now my toddler is sick too. So it'll just be me and my toddler tonight. And my husband hasn't offered once to stay home and help. Am I selfish for wanting that? When I say I'm sick, like I can't pick up our kiddo right now, I'm barely able to do the laundry and stuff. And before you ask, can you ask him to stay home? Nope, because he always gets triggered and angry when I ask him to stay home. Any advice? OP then comments here. Sorry, the last part was typed weird. It's supposed to say he gets triggered and angry when I ask him to stay home from an outing with the guys. Any advice? And then she also follows up, I love my husband and I'm trying to make things work between us, but he doesn't understand that a pregnant lady can't be of much help when they're also really sick. This does not sound like a relationship that's in a very good place to me. I think if I were under the same circumstances, if I was also sick and pregnant and I had a toddler at home, my husband, it wouldn't even occur to him to go somewhere else. He would 100% make sure that he's there to help me. I wouldn't have to ask him. It would just, he'd be like, okay, of course I can't go today. And if it was a really, really, really special event and he'd really invested a lot of time in it, if we would lose a lot of money from him not going, then I'm pretty sure he would try and make sure that I got some help from another family member or that there was someone else around to help me so that I could crash and someone could look after the toddler as much as possible. That's kind of what I would say is a normal way for the situation to go down if you are at having a healthy relationship and you both care about each other, you're both compassionate, you want to look after each other and make sure that that the whole family kind of makes it through the sickness with minimal stress and horrible feelings. Unfortunately, what it sounds like to me, especially when you say, hey, before you ask, can you ask him to stay home? No, because he always gets triggered and angry. That's the source of the problem that you're experiencing here. Now, it's hard to tell based on the information that we have here who's the unreasonable one in this situation because I don't know how often he goes out, for example. I don't know to what extent when he gets triggered and angry if you ask him to stay home from an outing with the guys. Is that because he wants to go out, twice a week and you're like, hey, that's a bit much. Maybe you can make it less often than that. And that's eventually, that's the source of the conflict. It could also be that he only goes out once a month. And then that one time a month that he really wants to go out, you're still like, I would rather you stayed home and helped out with the kid. And obviously there's a difference between those two scenarios in terms of how often is okay versus how often is not okay. Those are the types of that's the how often it would have to happen for me to be okay with it versus not. So if it were twice a week, I'd probably be like, nah, I'm not too keen on that. If it were once a month, I'd be okay with it. And I think that that's a completely reasonable amount of time, but it really depends on your own, your mileage may vary. It depends on what's okay with you and what isn't. So it's really hard to understand what is the norm for this relationship here, but it's very clear that you're just not in a good place, because if you're sick and you can't ask him to stay home to look after you when you're sick or to help you look after your kid when you're sick, then you're clearly not at a place where you can communicate with each other openly and honestly and with any kind of vulnerability. So that's kind of a shame. See what some of the comments say in response to this. The first person who replies to the thread says, you're not wanting too much. It's ridiculous that you'd even have to ask. I tell him he can't go. If you don't feel you can do that, you may need to find someone to talk to, because that's not a healthy situation. While I completely 100% agree, it is not a healthy situation. You should be able to say things to your husband, especially things along the lines of, hey, I know you have this plan today, but I'm really feeling down and I don't think it's good for me to be the only person around looking after our toddler. Fair enough. But this statement, I tell him he can't go. That's just not a way that you need to talk to your husband as a woman. And that will definitely cause so much more conflict than approaching it with any kind of humility and just like requesting it instead. She says, I tried that and he got really mad. So I just told him to please go to the game, which sounds a little bit passive aggressive to me. Yeah. And then the next person says, it sounds like he's only caring about his feelings and his social life is more important than his family life or how you feel. One of the unhealthy things about the forum sometimes is they really try to dig in to kind of make you feel worse about your situation, a little bit crappier. And I understand the urge. It's, a forum mostly of women. And so they try to band together and support the woman when she's struggling in her marriage or in her relationship. But it seems to me a little bit unconstructive. I would want to question why it is or how it is that you got to a place where your communication broke down to this extent that you can't really interact with each other openly, and to the point that he doesn't seem to care about you being sick, because I don't think that happens naturally, and I think it requires a long period of time to build up that kind of resentment or that kind of anger. One person here says she tries to give a bunch of different ways of still having a babysitter over, saying, hey, she could wear a mask. But then she also says, I mean, it's your husband's day off. He was probably looking forward to the game a lot, and he does need some fun in his life. You're not selfish for wanting to help, but he needs his fun too. So I wouldn't feel angry or disappointed about this. Just do the bare minimum you have to, order takeout and do absolutely nothing else. And he'll come home happy to help and ready to help some more. This kind of boggles my mind as a response. I truly do not believe that it is completely reasonable to say, hey, just go. It's fine. I know I'm sick, but you're looking forward to the game so much. I think it does require a certain amount of lack of care and lack of consideration on his side to do that. And so that kind of boggles my mind. I'm happy for this person that she's so open though, and that she would be okay with her husband taking the time out and just saying, yeah, okay, then I'm just going to hang out at home, just going to take it easy and just going to relax. Hopefully the toddler isn't so sick that it's actually really stressful to look after them, because that would make it so much worse. OP says here in response to this one, he ended up coming home early and I felt horrible. I don't want him to feel horrible. I just want him to make a good decision from the beginning to avoid the extra frustration that we both get from arguing. I kind of really don't like how she phrases this when she says, I just want him to make a good decision from the beginning. I just want him to agree with me from the beginning so we don't have to talk about it. You can already tell why communication in this relationship is not working out so well, because if you were to talk to me like that, then I'd also be really frustrated. The assumption that the decision that I want you to make is the good one and the decision that you want to make is the bad one, because clearly you have to do things my way because of course I'm right, really comes through very heavily here. And that's not a good assumption to make or to have when you're trying to have a conversation with someone else. And then she gets a little bit more validation from the next couple of people. The responsible thing for your husband to do would be to stay home and take care of the two of you. Would it suck that he can't go out? Of course, but that's a job. You're a husband and a father, and the home front comes first. So no, you're not overreacting. You and his child should be his top priority. And OP says, I really wish I wasn't sick and this wouldn't even be a problem, but I asked my husband to stay home and he freaked out. He acted like I planned this. That's why I get scared to even ask, I guess. And so that definitely highlights that the primary problem that you're experiencing here is 100% because of the breakdown of communication that you have in your relationship. I would really try to talk about that. I would try to fix that. And I would try to do it at a time when you're both calm, when you're both at home, when you're both happy, when you're both healthy, when your kid has someone else looking after them so that you're not distracted. And then you can really sit down and try to understand why it is that you don't feel able to ask your husband for help when you need it, and why he gets so angry at you if you do. And if it is a case of you asking him to stay home really often, if it's because he feels trapped and he doesn't get enough time by himself or hanging out with his friends or doing whatever things he needs to do in order to feel better about his life, then that's a conversation that you need to have, and you need to set some boundaries and to just get on the same page with regards to what you expect from each other. Our next thread of the day is titled Torn. My friend's child is a monster. She says, I'm in a friend group with 2 other women in my area who have children the same age as mine. They're very supportive friends. One in particular has been an incredible friend to me, particularly so as I am an introvert, who people fade away from easily as I'm not gregarious or require a lot of company. She's been at my house many nights when my husband has been overseas to help nurse my baby when I put my toddler down to sleep, dropped off meals when I had a newborn, etc. I really, really value her friendship. The one problem is her child is awful. I feel awful saying that as they are only 3 years old, but she's such a bully and really mean-spirited. Her child is extremely aggressive and violent, has always been, and not only pushes, pulls hair, slaps, and hits, snatches toys away, and will pull a child to the ground and smother them, she will also pick up an object and whack a kid over the head with it. Tonight, completely out of the blue as my son was sitting on the couch, she picked up the largest piece of the Grimm's rainbow toy, a sizable piece of solid wood, and hit my son in the face with it, 2 hands and a big swing. She'd been pushing him and throwing things all night, but that was the worst of it. It was the most horrible thing to see, and I actually feel a bit traumatized by it. This girl usually targets our other friend's daughter and leaves my son alone. It really disturbs me. My friend is pretty embarrassed by it, but I would be mortified if my child behaved this way. I'm really rethinking my friendship with this woman. I can't see my son attacked like this again. I don't know how to act when it happens too, because I really feel for my friend, but I just can't stand this girl. I understand she might be just feeling some kind of way to behave like that, and I also feel for the kid, but I must protect my baby. She's very advanced in her speech, and her mother is a psychologist. What would you do to handle this? Should I distance myself? I feel that this is one of those situations where all of the adults in that kid's life are letting her down, especially her mom, like 100% her mom, but also everyone else who watches her bully and beat and hit all the kids around her and doesn't do anything to stop her. She is clearly not getting any kind of discipline. She doesn't seem to get any kind of response from her mum. At least that's my assumption just from reading the thread, but we'll read a little bit further and see what OP has to say about this. And that's a fundamental problem. What I find really strange about OP's response here is she says, hey, the girl usually targets our other friend's daughter and she leaves my son alone. It really disturbs me. And so this has been happening for quite some time. They've been hanging out with this girl for quite some time. And it seems to me like OP was kind of happy to just watch it, like was a little bit disturbed by it, but not enough to actually act or step in or do anything about it, so long as the person being bullied was someone else's child. And then obviously the moment it's turned to her child, she's suddenly like, oh no, this isn't going to fly anymore. I can't watch this happening. That is not a great way to model good behavior as a parent. And I would hope that I could teach my kids that if they see anyone else being picked on by anyone else, that they can step in. That it's not only about your child, but it's also about having enough compassion and understanding for the other kids that are in the room to step in if you see them being picked on by someone. That said, the solution here is quite simple. You have to talk to your friend about the problem, right? And that doesn't mean you have to go to your friend and say, hey, your kid is kind of a bully and I don't like spending time with her and I don't want her around my child. But if it requires you to go that far, to be really clear and open and direct with your friend is 100% better than just quietly cutting off contact, not replying to her texts anymore, blowing her off and ghosting her if she asks to hang out. Like, you don't need to behave in that kind of way to your friend, especially a friend that's helped you out so much, that's really been one of those close people to you. Then it's only fair to sit down and say, look, I really love spending time with you. I would like to spend time with your kid as well, but the way that your kid behaves is too much for me and I don't want my child to be influenced by that. So if we aren't able to figure out a solution to your kid's behavior, then I'm afraid I can't have them hanging out. And that's completely fine. It is 100% your right to decide how to parent your child. And it is also your duty and your obligation as a parent to protect your child if you can. And this is one of those situations where clearly the people to blame are all the adults who are watching this happen without doing anything about it. I love the statement. She's very advanced in her speech, the kid, and her mother is a psychologist. Like, it should be clear that her mother should have better tools to be able to handle the situation, and that the child is not dumb. So you can maybe even sit down and have a conversation with her about hitting and violence and aggression, and why it's not okay when you're trying to play with other people, and how no one will want to play with her in the future if she continues behaving this way. Because kids just try things out and they test all boundaries that are offered to them, and you as a parent are you're the person that has to discipline that, or you as the adult in the situation. Not that I'm saying discipline your friend's kid, but you have to at least kick your friend into doing it if you need to. The first couple of responses say, as awful as it is, I'd probably distance myself from them purely because I don't think I could control myself if my daughter was being picked on. Your friend has to take responsibility because she's the mother. What happens if her daughter does something that lands your son in hospital? How does your friend react after she's done something? And then OP says, she usually either picks up the hurt child and consoles them if she's closer than the parent, or picks up her daughter, scolds her, and removes her from the room. And so it's clear that the mum is trying to respond to the situation in some kind of way. She may just be overwhelmed by her child's behavior, and maybe she just doesn't have any idea about how to fix it. But even then, I would still talk to her about it, and I would still make it clear that you don't want to have it around your child. And then it's her responsibility to try and find solutions for it. And I don't know how many parenting books or things like that you read, but if you read parenting books and you've come across something that might be helpful to her, you can suggest that. You can obviously try and help her out in terms of getting contacts with other child psychologists, other people who are a little bit more experienced and can help her out in terms of controlling her behavior. But that is going above and beyond as a friend. That's trying to help your friend out who's struggling with a problem. I wouldn't do that unsolicited. I would only do that over the course of a conversation. If it seems to me like you go up to her and you're like, hey, how's it going with your kid? And why is she so angry all the time? And what's happening with this aggression? Is she like this at home as well? Just maybe approach that conversation with a little bit of curiosity and open-mindedness and see what your friend says. Because it's very possible that your friend is like, oh my God, it's been so hard to handle it, and I've been trying really hard, and it's such a mess, and we've worked on this and worked on that, and it's not working out. And then at least you can still be there for your friend without necessarily taking back the boundary that you set in terms of how that child interacts with your kid. So you do not have to give up on your relationship with your friend just because you don't want your kids to play together. You can do both at the same time. The next person says, when I got to the point of the mum being a psychologist, my heart kind of sank because she has access to all kinds of tools and resources many people wouldn't have. On the other hand, maybe this makes her less likely to seek out advice. I would just straight up talk with her and say how you're really concerned after her kid hit yours like that, and you feel really awkward saying anything, but you're noticing it's a problem. Maybe offer to help her with a plan to help. She'll either try some new stuff with you or she won't, but at least you tried. Exactly. I think it's really mean to just kind of completely give up on the friendship, especially if it's a friend that means a lot to you. Then it's not fair to punish her in that kind of way. I like this comment because this person actually has some phrasing suggestions. And so she says, I think if I were in her shoes, I'd appreciate someone being honest with me instead of just ghosting me after I'd been there for them. Exactly. At the next play date, or perhaps after, I'd say something like, hey, I'm starting to get very concerned about your kid's anger and aggressiveness towards my baby. I love you and your kiddo so much, but I think it's best if we pause play dates and see if this phase of hitting and picking on others wears off. I just don't want my little one to get hurt, and I also don't want them thinking that this behavior is okay. I'd still really like to remain friends, and I hope my honesty is not offensive to you. Let me know if I can help in any way when it comes to helping her work through her anger and aggression. And that's a pretty nice way of phrasing it. I would probably skip one part of this, which is, I hope my honesty is not offensive to you. I think that this level, like, honestly, if your friend is offended, then you're not very good friends, because if you can't talk about things like this openly and honestly with your friends, then you're not on the same page, and that's not a good friendship. So I would probably skip that line, but that's just me. Otherwise, the rest of this is really sweet and really nice. And so the advice that this person got was really great from the forum. In general, when you are friends with people, I think I would always try to approach that relationship with a level of honesty and directness and care, that this person understands that it's not because you have a problem with her or you do have a problem with her kid, but it's a behavioral thing. And it's definitely the case that kids do grow out of this if it's a phase. And if it's not caused by any of the people in her life or reinforced by any of the people in her life, then it's very likely that she'll calm down. But it's definitely 100% the mother's responsibility to step in and stop it. And if it's happening really often, then that's not cool. And also, if you see a kid picking on another kid repeatedly and it's not your kid, so you don't care, that's not a good way of dealing with that situation either. Our next thread of the day is titled Visiting versus Helping. OP says, my first post in this group, this is more of a vent, but I want to see if others have experienced this. My mother-in-law lives out of state and just met our 3-month-old baby during her visit. She's staying with her brother and has been so excited to meet her. Tell me how she's here and all she does is take pictures of her. No help at all. Mind you, I have no family where I live and my husband and I are pretty much on our own. I really did think my mother-in-law would offer to help us out, knowing we do everything on our own, or even offer to help us clean, cook. She'll take pictures of little one, of the baby, but she isn't hands-on or proactive. I keep thinking if she wants the baby to be bigger so she doesn't have to care for her as much, or if she's like, because she really wanted a grandson. This is her first grandchild. I told my husband that his mum isn't proactive and hands-on, and honestly, she looks so uncomfortable holding our daughter. She also decides to spray an excessive amount of perfume when she comes over, and it makes baby so fussy. Once the baby starts crying, she'll give her to us right away and tell us she's hungry when she's just been fed. Maybe I had an expectation she would do her grandma duties versus being the photographer for little one, for the baby, and not doing anything at all. It seems she just came to visit and not get to know her daughter, her granddaughter, sorry. Anyone experience this? I have so many issues with so many of the things that OP says here. The first one is the expectation, like she does take pictures of her, but she's no help at all. I thought she'd offer to help us out, knowing that we do everything on our own, or even offer to help us clean and cook. I think obviously, look, it's really nice when in-laws come over and then they're really hands-on and they're really helpful. So my in-laws are very much those type of people where the moment that they are inside the house, they'll do whatever they can to help us out. If anything's a mess, they'll try to clean it. They'll, clean up the floors, etc. Whatever they can do to help, they will do it. Don't get me wrong, this is an amazing person to have in your life, and that's really something to be grateful for. And it's really great when people have the impulse to do that without you needing to ask, without you needing to needle them into it, without it having to be some kind of like quid pro quo thing where only if you help them out will they ever help you out. Of course, it's nice to have those people in your life. However, those people are special people. There's a sense of entitlement that comes through in this thread that I think is a little bit unhealthy. It's not good to expect people to help you of their own volition. That's not a good way to interact with the world. I would rather approach the world from the perspective of, okay, what can I do to help other people? And then hope that, what goes around comes around. Eventually, the people in your life will appreciate having you around so much that they'll want to help you without you needing to do anything else. So that part, I think, is not very cool. I also think that the criticism of she isn't hands-on, she isn't proactive, she looks uncomfortable holding our daughter. Now, I don't know how old your husband is. I don't know how long, how old your mother-in-law is. So I don't know how long it's been since she's interacted with a 3-month-old baby and held them and played with them and so on. But maybe she's just not used to it. Maybe she's forgotten what it's like. Maybe she didn't engage with your husband quite that much when he was a baby. Maybe she's just not comfortable with babies. Maybe she just doesn't have ideas about how to play with a baby. So there's so many other potential explanations and potential reasons for this. And it's kind of mean to me to be sitting there and watching her be uncomfortable and just go, hey, she just isn't hands-on or proactive. She's just, sitting there and taking pictures. And don't get me wrong, I do think that this obsession with taking pictures is an unhealthy one, like if that's the only way that you're interacting with your grandchild. But I suspect that the cause of this problem is just that she doesn't know how to bond with a baby properly. And that is the only reason that she looks awkward, she feels awkward. when she's interacting with them. Yes, maybe she wants a baby to be a little bit bigger so that she can do more with them. That's a completely natural thing for grandparents to want. Babies, when they're very, very young, can only do so much, and they're not very interactive, and they don't really interact back with you when you try to do things with them. So it's completely normal and natural to be like, okay, she can only do so much as a grandma in this period of time. So that's normal. And I find it sad to criticize her for it so intensely. The perfume thing, you can talk to her about, be like, hey, the perfume's just a little bit intense for the baby. So she spends a while, she just gets fussy after you interact with her because it's just a bit much for her. That's not a big deal. That's a really simple conversation to have. It's a one-line thing. And if the mother-in-law is a reasonable person, then she'll just back up, she'll just do it. Like, it's not a problem to spray a little bit less perfume on. I also really don't like the last statement when she says, when the baby starts crying, she'll give her to us right away and tell us that she's hungry. A lot of mothers have way bigger problems with in-laws, grandparents, aunts, uncles, other people in the family not giving back the child when the child starts crying. Not to say that she can't make some kind of effort to calm her down, that's fine. But if she's like, hey, baby seems upset, that she must need something, it's completely fine for her to give her to you. I don't get it. I don't like the statement that she's not doing her grandma duties versus being a photographer and not doing anything at all. I think that is a terrible way of interacting with her as a grandmother. And there's a lot more that you could do there to help them build a better relationship over the long run. Like, this is something that will take years, right? It is not something that you can expect to happen over the course of one tiny little visit when your baby is 3 months old and can't really sit, doesn't babble, at most like looks at you and smiles at you. So yes, it's completely fine for your in-laws to come and just visit you without doing anything else. That's how I would read this situation. Some responses from the others. OP also says, also forgot to mention how obsessed she is with her phone. She'll be scrolling and scrolling, and I just roll my eyes because she's visiting for 2 weeks and she isn't even trying to bond with the baby. And this one is fair enough. I completely understand that people have really unhealthy habits when it comes to their phones. I actually think that for the grandparents, the current grandparent generation, I kind of understand where it comes from, because they had this experience of not being able to document anything, of access to photos being something that was really rare, and it being really difficult both to take a photo, to print it, to have it in an album, and so on. And now, you have access to it 100% of the time. And I can see why that's a little bit addictive. I get that that's a bad behavior. I actually would also get it if you're like, hey, I don't want my kid to just engage with you all the time and while you're on your phone the entire time. Like, that's not a good habit for them to be around, and I don't want them to learn that. That's completely fine. Like, you can talk to her about it. But there's not much you can do to bond with a 3-month-old unless you're the mom or maybe the dad. There's just not much that you can do. So it's not that big of a deal. One person says, I think it's fair to hope that someone would be helpful when there's a new baby. Did you express what your expectations were for this visit? Some people see it as just that, and if she didn't offer help, I wouldn't have expected it. If I did need help, I would have said upon her entering the home, hey, mother-in-law, so glad you're here. Can you help me with this while I do Y? And then we can all sit back and relax with the baby, something along those lines. Maybe for the next visit, have this discussion beforehand, and about the pictures. Hey, we'll take some pictures for you so you can be present with her. Or make a new rule, phones get checked at the door. It's a really funny way to deal with adults. Leave your phone at the door, please. Pretty much all of these things should be discussed either in the moment or before the visit. If she doesn't like that, then oh well, your baby, your house, your baby, your rules, your house, your rules. Fair enough. You can set up rules. I don't think you necessarily need to start treating your mother-in-law like she's a child who can't be trusted to put her phone down if you ask her to put her phone down. But yeah, like that you can change the course of the conversation that you have, so it's a much more positive one, and then it's not such a big deal, and then you don't get so bitter about it, and you don't get so angry about it either. Yeah. And OP here says, my mother-in-law is staying about 40 minutes away, and my husband is going back and forth with pick up and drop off. It's annoying, it's very selfish, but my husband is an only child, and my mother-in-law treats him as if he's her man sometimes. So I think she expects him to do everything for her. Honestly, it sounds to me like OP is bitter about a lot of things. And fundamentally, what she's bitter about is the way that her mother-in-law interacts with her husband more than anything else. There is a certain amount, I don't know what happens. There's always a lot of history and context that's not present in these threads because people have lives and there's a million interactions that happened before this particular event happened. And it seems to me like a lot of other people in the comments do agree with her read of the situation. So maybe I am the weird one here. But yeah, in general, it's better to be grateful when people are good to you rather than to be angry if they are not going out of their way to be good to you. And just don't expect anything from anyone. No one owes you anything. That's the fundamental truth of it. Even if they're family, they do not owe you their time. They don't owe you their energy. They don't owe you a clean house. It's not their responsibility to do all of these things. And if they're interacting with your kids in a way that you don't like, then speak up. You can say so. And most good people will listen. Our next thread of the day is titled, "My mother took it upon herself." My mother came to the conclusion that my baby was still hungry after I had just fed him 4 ounces only an hour earlier. He just turned 1 month old and is eating 30 plus ounces a day, 4 ounces every 2 to 4 hours. I exclusively pump for various reasons. One of them is to ensure that he consumes enough milk since he was not gaining weight during his first few weeks. I'm currently pumping just enough milk to feed him his usual 4-ounce servings throughout the day, and I'm working on increasing my supply. She assumed he was hungry because he was fussing a few minutes after being laid down for a nap, even though I assured her he just isn't used to sleeping in the pack and play. But since my mother was being persistent about feeding him more, I told her she could warm up an ounce of milk from the fridge under hot water. I don't heat milk in the microwave because of hot spots and nutrient damage. She decided to serve him the ounce straight from the fridge and still cold instead of taking the few minutes it takes to warm it for him. Not only that, she then took it upon herself to decide that he was still hungry and proceeded to take 2 more ounces of milk from the fridge and put it in the microwave before feeding him while I was attached to my breast pump and unable to intervene. I told her that her actions were devious and disrespectful to me as a parent, as I have told her multiple times in the past that I'm only pumping enough to maintain his current ounces per day routine. This upset her and she began berating me about how I need to give him my breasts for nourishment and comfort and asked me if I use pumping as a way to avoid my son throughout the day. Absolutely absurd. I was so upset at that point and felt trapped in this interrogation over whether or not I provide enough for my son and give him sufficient nourishment and comfort without choosing to nurse him. I love my child and I do anything I can to take care of him. Now, I think any discussions about how you feed your child, what you feed your child, how much you feed your child are all very heated and very emotionally fraught conversations. And I completely understand why, because I think every mother would react extremely defensively to the implication that she's not feeding her child enough or that her child is somehow being harmed by how she's feeding him. I also think that while, whatever happened in this argument, obviously we only hear one side here, whatever happened in this argument, the things that the mother said in this situation were totally out of line. She should not have said that. I think the implication of, the accusation, do you use pumping as a way to avoid your son throughout the day, is a really, really tough one to swallow. I would have major problems with that. And so that was completely out of line. That said, the fundamental cause of the argument here in terms of feeding the baby a little bit more, I don't think that this was coming from a bad place. And I would also caution against the assumption that you can use maths to figure out how much babies should eat. There is this temptation to go, okay, it's actually almost confusing to me because she says he wasn't gaining weight through his first few weeks. So now we need to make sure that he eats at least this much, right? And that's great. But you know what happens with weight gain? Weight gain is not linear. So it's not that babies will always gain at exactly the same pace all throughout their life. What happens is that they have little spurts where they grow a little bit faster and then they plateau. And then they grow a little bit faster and then they plateau. And then they grow a little bit faster and then they plateau. And what that means in practice is that there will be, a week, 2 weeks where they need to eat a ton more because their body's doing a lot of growth in that period of time. and then it regulates again and they eat a normal amount again for a little bit longer, and then it goes up again. So there's a variation that happens naturally if you follow their signals. That happens to all babies, that happens to all kids, that happens all the time, that happens to all people. To you as an adult as well, it will happen. And for us as adults, maybe it's much more dependent on the amount of activity you do per day, but that will also come, like that's also a factor for kids eventually as well. Not for a 1-month-old. Now, for a 1-month-old, honestly, if he is fussing, and yes, okay, maybe he'll still go to sleep, maybe he'll still drink the exact right amount that you're nursing him, maybe he's not so upset at being nursed a little bit extra that it's a major problem. And I also understand having this attitude towards your breast milk where it's like, it's super precious, it takes so much time. I can only imagine how much effort pumping is. I could not do it myself. So I totally understand where that's all coming from. I just really don't think that the mother came from a bad place here. And I think it's actually okay to feed the baby a little bit extra. And if the baby takes it, then they're probably fine. If they spit up a lot, if they have digestion problems, if they struggle to sleep afterwards because they're too full, or they're like squirming all the time, or they seem like they're in pain, then okay, fair enough. She overdid it. But the vast majority of babies, if they're really full, they will stop and turn their head away. You know, they have a way to signal to you, hey, I'm done with food right now. I don't want any more. And so if she got extra food out for the baby and she tried to feed them a little bit more, she obviously did that from a place of care. And I think having that level of understanding for that is not too much to ask for. So I think that there's a certain level of anger here. And I believe that the anger comes from this accusation that you're feeding your kid too little. And that obviously is a problem. But the actions of the mother here are not devious. And I don't believe that they are necessarily disrespectful to you as a parent, because if she really genuinely believed that your baby was hungry, she just did not want to leave your baby to go hungry. That's not a bad thing. That's actually a great thing to have. If someone were to look after my baby for some period of time, and then I told them, hey, usually he eats this amount, so give him this amount. And they did that, but then afterwards he was still unhappy, he was still fussy, he seemed to be hungry, and they decided to give him more of their own volition, I would be happy. If they decided not to give him more of their own volition because they were like, hey, but you told us that we could only feed this amount, that I would actually be very angry at them. And it would, to me, prove that they cannot look after my baby, because clearly if my baby is hungry, they don't take the time to feed them. And that's a much bigger problem. So I think, OP, take a step back, give yourself some time. I know pumping is hard, but maybe don't be so angry at your mom for trying to look after your child to the best of her ability. And I understand the microwaving thing is annoying. And again, I totally get it in terms of, hey, breast milk is super precious and you put so much energy and so much time into getting it there. But it's not going to be the end of the world. The amount of nutrients that the microwave will destroy are not, it's not that your breast milk is now useless. It's not that him eating it is going to, or drinking it is going to cause problems. It's okay. It's okay. If it happens once, then it happens once. You can tell her, hey, I really, really don't like it. And please never microwave it again. And if she was careful about, the temperature of the milk and it didn't get too high, then chances are it was fine, that it wasn't a problem. But, you can have that boundary. You can talk to her about it. But the fundamental rage that you're feeling is, I would say, coming at the accusation and the implication that she's having in terms of wanting to feed your baby more than you say, and that's suggesting to you that you're not feeding him enough, versus the actual problem of her actions, which were clearly motivated by a good thing. That's how I read this situation. And unfortunately, I seem to be the only person who reads it this way. The first comment says, your mother is definitely overfeeding your baby and should never microwave milk. Do you live with her? If not, I would consider taking a break from her until she learns to respect your rules. And OP says, no, thankfully, we don't live together. I wouldn't be able to tolerate that. She doesn't believe in overfeeding. She's under the impression that if an infant takes what they're given, then that means that they are hungry. I don't think that she's necessarily 100% wrong about this. There is definitely the case with formula that you can overfeed, and I understand why that happens. But with breast milk, I think it's very, very difficult to overfeed. I think babies tend to have a natural amount that they will take. And yeah, okay, maybe with bottles, There's a difference here, most likely, of feeding pumped bottles versus actually nursing and breastfeeding directly from the breast, because I do think that babies will naturally regulate themselves 100% of the time when you're feeding from the breast. Whereas if you are doing it with bottles, then I guess it's possible, because bottles have a very different type of flow and letdown is different, and it's, the rhythm of feeding is very different from a bottle versus from a breast. So maybe that's how that happens. But babies do let you know if they're full. They really do. At least in my experience, they have. And my experience is quite limited. So take that with a grain of salt. Next person says, just remember, no is a complete sentence. You don't have to explain yourself. Tell her no. Then if she continues, I would tell her you can continue the visit when she respects you. Then pack up and leave. I would have told her to leave. She crossed all sorts of lines. As a former exclusive pumper, I understand where you're coming from. If it makes you feel any better, my daughter had no problem drinking her bottles cold, and it made it so much easier for me, especially when we started venturing out and traveling to see family. She also drank it warm and at room temperature and couldn't have cared less as long as she was getting what she wanted. There is no indication that it needs to be warm for them, so you can rest a little easier on that front if you want. And here OP says, I'm sure it would have been okay, but he kept spitting it back out, so I felt that it went to waste anyway. Just an overall stressful situation. And to that I would say, OP, maybe it is the action of pumping that is so stressful for you, more than anything else. And that one I really can't help with in terms of how to make that a less stressful situation. You do say that you exclusively pump for various reasons, and one of those reasons is the weight gain. But honestly, it might actually help to try to nurse at least a little bit so that you can cut down a little bit on the pumping. Your supply will probably respond faster to your baby nursing versus a pump and trying to increase your supply via a pump. In general, it's easier if you surrender yourself to the ways of nature, and let things happen the way that they should happen. The relationship when it comes to mother and child, when breastfeeding is involved, is very different. And you do kind of learn to trust that your baby understands how to regulate the amount that he's getting and their nutrients all by themselves. That you don't need to, as a mother, sit there and kind of shove more food down their throat under some circumstances, or stop them from overeating. That's the beauty of breastfeeding. Now, yes, of course, if he wasn't gaining weight, I completely understand why you would start pumping. But if you are exclusively pumping 100% of the time, and that is a really stressful experience for you, then that is probably something that you should try to solve. Because if you're under constant stress from the way that you're feeding your child, and you're feeding your child that way 100% of the time, then you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're setting yourself up for these kinds of conflicts happening all of the time. And that's not good, and that's not healthy for you or for your baby. Our next thread of the day is titled, Am I the a-hole? She says, OP says, if I send gifts from my mother-in-law back to the thrift shop, am I the a-hole if I send gifts from her back to the thrift shop? She says, I have tried gently letting her know that we have too much, asking her to keep an eye out for specific things the kids need, saying thanks, but that stays here at grandma's. She just doesn't seem to get it. We see her 1 to 2 times a week, and every time she has a grocery bag full of stuff for the kids. Some things I appreciate, like she gets a few nice articles of clothing, but my daughter has 5 pairs of rubber boots, including a pair we sent to the thrift store and she repurchased. She got my little one a Tonka truck for his birthday, which was fabulous, but she also bought 6 more trucks for the yard. I try to limit toys, and especially cheap plastic toys, which the rest were. She refuses to listen to the fact that I do not want soft toys from the thrift shop in the house due to the risk of bed bugs, which she has had, and continues to buy them even if she goes with my daughter, especially if she goes with my daughter. And I'm not there. She'll bring them in, not even washed, which doesn't kill bed bugs anyways, but still, and let her play with them on the furniture. Rant over. But seriously, am I the a-hole if I just start sending her stuff back? It's a small town. She'll definitely see it there, but we are drowning in stuff. Now, this one hits a bit close to home. My in-laws also like buying just a little bit too much, but they are not quite so dedicated to it. So no, OP, I would 100% get rid of the stuff, whether it's sending it back to the thrift shop, whether it's throwing it, whether it's donating it. However you want to do it, I would not have toys in my house that I do not want in my house for any reason. I think that grandparents do this. Again, it's motivated, like it comes, the intentions are always good, you know? The road to hell is paved with good intentions, but in a slightly less dire way. So yes, the intentions are good. They want a way to, engage with your kid. They see toys. They're excited to see the grandchild play with them. And so they pick them up and they're like, oh my God, it's going to be awesome. And so on. Like, I understand the urge. I think that it comes, this is my assumption, and I don't know how old your kids are. But I think part of it is a lack of understanding exactly how to bond or play with the kids. I would want in the long run, hopefully, because my child is still very young, to push my in-laws a lot more towards experiences and, just taking the kid out to experience things rather than buying material items and that being the currency with which they interact with each other. And I also think it's really unhealthy, like especially if you see her 1 to 2 times a week and she has a grocery bag full of stuff. I think what you're teaching your kids through that behavior and the repetition of it is that every single time they see grandma, they are always going to get some gift, and that makes them really, really entitled. I don't know if you've watched Harry Potter or read Harry Potter, but it's the type of relationship that Dudley Dursley has with his parents, where, one Christmas he gets 20 gifts and then he's like, oh my God, this year I only got 20 toys. Or was it for his birthday? I don't remember exactly the numbers and the event, but you could really tell that he was like, last year I got 21. Why is it only 20 this year? And then his parents were like, of course, we'll go buy some more. That's not a good thing to train into your kids. That's not a good expectation for them to have. It's not healthy for them to have. And you are well within your rights as a parent to really draw the line and say, look, I'm not good with this. What I don't understand about this whole thread is, where's your husband? And why is your husband not talking to her? How I would deal with the situation is definitely get rid of the stuff that you don't want, but I would also be a lot more direct with her in terms of this not being okay. I think this, when you say I tried gently letting her know that we have too much, you were probably a little bit too gentle. I think it's easy to ignore people when they're very gentle. I think I would go all out and say, look, mother-in-law, this is not cool. I really don't want this number of gifts. You can get them gifts for these events, for these occasions, at this type of cadence, but we are not having these types of gifts in the house, and we are not having gifts so often. We don't think that either of those are good. And then you can sit down and talk to her about why, explain to her why if you need to explain to her why. You can tell her, hey, why do you buy so much stuff? Maybe there are other ways that you can engage and interact with our children that aren't like that, and try to push her and redirect her in that direction. Be a little bit kind about it. But no, you are not the a-hole for wanting to get rid of stuff that you don't want. Some of the comments here, yep, send it back and be obvious about it. Say, thanks, Grandma. That goes straight to the garage until we can thrift shop it. All the polite methods are failing, so just be straight up. If she actually realizes what's happening, you can simply say, I've tried talking to you several times about this, but you keep getting more stuff. We just don't have the room for it. And then the next person says, mine also brings stuff over for our baby every single time she comes over, which is once, sometimes twice a week. It's nice and I'm grateful most of the time, but she buys doubles of books and clothes that she already knows, that my little one already has, and little trinket things, which I hate, from the thrift store for something special. Today she brought around 6 pairs of socks, which is great. You can never have too many socks for a toddler. But then she said, I bought these socks because I didn't know if she had any. And see, this is when moms just get a little bit petty, just a little bit, specific statements that kind of really annoy you. Like, hey, are you suggesting that I don't buy my kid socks? You don't need to take it that way. Just those are the types of comments that I would just let roll straight over my back. But OP here actually does reply. Her daughter is 5. My daughter is 5 now, and she greets her with, what did you bring for me? Don't you have anything for me? I cannot imagine how you were okay with letting this go on for 5 years. That's an insane long amount of time, but this is long overdue as a conversation, and you should definitely get your husband to take it on if you are failing at making her change her habits. So yes, terrible habit to teach your kids, and not the a-hole for wanting to get rid of toys. And dear grandparents out there who are probably not listening to this, but if you happen to be listening to this, please be reasonable about the amounts of things that you buy for your grandchildren. We understand that your role as grandparents is to buy them lots of stuff, but also only so much stuff is necessary. And, they don't need so many toys. Kids should just play outside. They don't need so many toys. Our final thread of the day is titled Overthinking About Everything, and I Just Need Advice. I'm 10 weeks and 5 days, and I keep thinking the worst is going to happen. I constantly look up what the signs are for miscarriage, as well as I'm constantly looking up every little ache and pains that I have, thinking something is wrong. My health insurance hasn't kicked in yet, so I still can't go to the OB. What do I do to stop overthinking? I feel fine. I have normal mild cramping once in a while, which the ER said will be normal since everything is growing and stretching, the ER said, as well as dealing with mood swings still and major fatigue every day around the same time. Please, any advice helps. Now, it's clearly the case that OP already called the ER to double check that she didn't have a miscarriage, I guess, which sounds a little bit horrifying. I'm sorry that you are so stressed out, OP. Probably the thing that would help you out the most is just not thinking about it. I don't know what it is about the fear of miscarriage. I think it's one of those things that gets a lot worse when you have access to social media, because in general, social media just gives you anxiety a lot more than it helps out with what you're going through. So maybe some aspect of it is spend a little bit of time off Google and off social media, because that's probably not helping you. And the rest of it is just relax, find yourself things to do that are engaging, that are mentally fun for you to do, that make you a little bit happy. If you're fatigued, just go sleep, eat nice food, be comfortable. And that's it. I don't think that there is any other way to approach it. Probably give yourself like a line, cut a line and draw a line in the sand, where you just stop looking stuff up, and you, every single time that you find yourself coming back to a thought that is making you anxious, just stop and say, no, I will not entertain this thought right now, and go do something else. And eventually it'll get easier. If you're at 10 weeks and 5 days, then you're honestly quite late in your first trimester already. So I would not be quite so stressed out. But honestly, the thing about miscarriage is that you can't do anything to prevent it. So it doesn't matter how long you spend thinking about it. It doesn't matter whether you go to a doctor to get things checked, or how often you go to the doctor to get things checked. It doesn't matter that, if you go to the ER because you feel like you're getting some cramps. Ultimately, if a miscarriage were to happen, there is just nothing that you can do to stop it. And that sucks, and that's really unfortunate, and it's really painful, and it really, really is awful for everyone who experiences it, but it's just one of the facts of life that you just can't avoid. So there's just no point in spending all of this time and all of this energy thinking about it unless it happens. This is one of those stoicism lessons that I really would recommend for everyone to learn, which is focus on the things that you can control. And this is one of those situations that you cannot control. So the moment that you understand that you can't control it, then there's nothing left for you to do. Some advice from other people: read pregnancy books and self-care books, do some meditation and breathing just to center yourself, look them up on YouTube. I felt that even 5 minutes of that a day were helpful. The less stressed you are, the healthier you will be, and it will be good for the baby. Do some self-care stuff and rest as much as you can. Don't feel guilty for not taking care of everything. And so on. One person recommends, which I personally would not recommend, she says, a Doppler eases me. I found a heartbeat at 9 weeks. A Doppler is an ultrasound device that you can hold against your belly to hear a heartbeat. It is extremely unreliable early on in pregnancy, because you have to really exactly find the heart. And if you're, depending on the placement of your placenta, depending on where the baby is and how they're laying, that might be extremely difficult to do. And so a lot of people will try to buy one and try to listen to the heartbeat, and then they won't hear anything. And then that will make their anxiety so much worse. So Dopplers are not the answer. You do not need to hear your baby's heartbeat 100% of the time to know that your baby is still alive. It is much more likely to be to happen the other direction, where so long as you're fine and you're feeling fine and you have no cramps, you have no bleeding, you're not feeling horrible for whatever reason, beyond, the normal amount of, I guess, horribleness that you would feel in terms of pregnancy symptoms. If you actually are still experiencing pregnancy symptoms, then all of these are signs that you're okay and your baby is okay. And that's it. It's just one of those things that you just have to get through in terms of early pregnancy. At some point, you hit a point in your pregnancy where your baby's moving every day. And then all of a sudden, you're anxious about very different things because you still have things to be anxious about. But anxiety in pregnancy is not a healthy thing. And you have to understand that people have been getting pregnant for a very long time. People have been getting through pregnancies for a very long time. And the amount of tools that we have now, things like Dopplers, ultrasounds, etc., these are all still very new. So for the vast majority of humankind, when mums would get pregnant, they would not know anything about their babies for a very, very long time until the baby started moving. And so you just have to accept that this is part of the experience, that it's okay. It's okay not to know too much. And here I'll read out this particular comment because it really backs up what I said. I'm right there with you. I'm only 5 weeks, 3 days. I'm legitimately losing sleep. Every little thing is worrying me, and TikTok definitely doesn't help. So I've stopped scrolling. Every little pain and cramp is scaring me half to death, and I can't even speak with an OB until February 7th. This was posted on January 25th. And it's just a phone appointment. I'm trying to meditate, but it's rough. If you want to talk, I'm here. So yes, social media, get off social media. It's just not good for you. Not good for you, not good for anxiety at all. And in general, try to approach your pregnancy with a little bit of levity, a little bit of just lightness, and do what you can to enjoy it as an experience, to look after yourself, to be comfortable as much as you can be. And that's it. There's nothing else that you can do to prevent a miscarriage. So there's no point in looking up every sign on Google. Thank you so much for listening today. See you next time.